When my father passed away, I expected grief, not betrayal. At the will reading, I sat among my siblings, bracing myself for the formalities. But as the lawyer's voice moved down the list of beneficiaries, my name never came. My father had skipped me entirely, and I felt the air leave my lungs. Then, just as the final page turned, the lawyer froze. My father had left a handwritten addendum, sealed in an envelope, with instructions to be read only after the main will. The contents not only shocked everyone in the room, they exposed a secret my father had hidden for decades, one that could destroy the fragile image of our family forever. Thought the day would feel heavier, that the weight of losing my father would press down on me the moment I stepped into that wood-paneled conference room. Instead, it was the silence that unsettled me. A suffocating, artificial silence, like the kind you get in a funeral home when everyone's afraid to speak too loudly, as if grief might shatter like glass. The lawyer, Mr. Harper, sat at the head of the long mahogany table, papers stacked neatly in front of him. My siblings had taken their seats before I arrived. Daniel sat to my left, scrolling through his phone as if this were just another boring meeting. Claire was on my right, her eyes red and puffy, though I wasn't sure if it was from crying or from lack of sleep. We hadn't spoken much since the funeral. I told myself I wasn't nervous. My father wasn't a rich man by the world's standards, but his life's work, the house, the land, his small investments, would be enough to help all of us. I didn't expect more than my share, but I expected fairness. I expected my name. Mr. Harper cleared his throat. "We'll begin," he said, adjusting his glasses. His voice was steady, but I noticed the way his eyes lingered on each of us before reading, as if already aware that this would not be a simple afternoon. The list began. My father left Daniel the truck and the tools from the garage. Claire was given the lake cabin. My cousin Ellen, surprisingly, received a piece of land that I didn't even know my father still owned. Each name that was called brought a small murmur from the table, a rustle of shifting bodies and whispered surprise, but my name never came. Sat there, my hands gripping the armrests, waiting for the moment when Mr. Harper would finally look at me and say the words. But instead, he kept reading, his voice skipping right over me as if I didn't exist. My heart started pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. When the main reading was over, Mr. Harper stacked the papers neatly and set them aside. "That concludes the official will." He reached for a manila envelope, sealed with an old-fashioned red wax stamp. "However, there is an addendum. Handwritten by your father, and dated 3 weeks before his passing." Daniel frowned. "An addendum? Why wasn't that read first?" "Because your father's instructions were very specific," Mr. Harper replied. "This was to be read only after the original will. And only in the presence of all 3 of you." My stomach twisted. All 3 of us? Did that mean me? Or was I still invisible in whatever my father had planned? Mr. Harper broke the seal. The sound loud in the quiet room. He unfolded the paper slowly, scanning it once before clearing his throat again. But this time, something in his expression changed. His lips pressed together. His brow furrowed. And then, just before speaking, he froze, his eyes flicking up to meet mine, as if unsure whether to go on. "What is it?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. He took a deep breath, then began to read. "To my children, and to the one who doesn't yet know they are my child." The room erupted. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel sat back in his chair, stunned. My blood went cold, my mind struggling to keep up with the words, and then Mr. Harper read the next line, the one that made me realize my father's secret was not about who would get his house, or his money, but about who we really were. The air in the room felt heavier after Mr. Harper's words, as though someone had pulled a curtain over the sun. My fingers dug into the wood of the table. I tried to speak, but my throat tightened, and my voice caught somewhere between shock and disbelief. "What did you just say?" Mr. Harper adjusted his glasses. "Your father wrote, and I quote, to my children, and to the one who doesn't yet know they are my child. He paused, scanning the next lines, then looked back at us as if to measure our reactions. Claire's eyes were wide, glassy, her chest rising and falling faster than before. That makes no sense, she said. There are only 3 of us. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His voice was low but sharp. Unless there aren't. My mind raced, flipping through decades of memories, searching for some crack in the story of my life. I remembered the way my father used to watch me sometimes, not with the casual glance of a parent, but with a kind of studied attention. As if he were trying to memorize something he wasn't sure he deserved to keep. Mr. Harper cleared his throat again and began to read the rest. You may have grown up believing the truth about our family. But you didn't. One of you is not who you think you are. I cannot leave this world without telling you, and yet I cannot bear to see your faces when the truth is spoken. So I leave the details to be discovered in the locked box in my study. I froze. The locked box. I had seen it before, hidden on the bottom shelf behind dusty law books. My father had always brushed it off when I asked about it. Just old papers, he would say, his voice light, but his eyes avoiding mine. Daniel was already looking at me, suspicion flickering in his gaze. If anyone's been in that study, it's you, he said. You lived closest. You were there all the time. The accusation stung, not because it was unfair, but because it was true. I had been there often, helping with chores, bringing him groceries, sitting with him in the evenings when the house felt too quiet. I had been close enough to see the things others might miss, but I had never, not once, considered that he was hiding something about me. Claire spoke softly, almost to herself. So which one of us isn't really his child? The question hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. Mr. Harper closed the letter carefully, sliding it back into the envelope. Your father's instructions are clear. The box is to be opened by all of you together. Until then, I can't say more. Daniel pushed his chair back. Then let's go now. But Harper shook his head. Your father left another condition. The box cannot be opened until sunset today. He was adamant about that. I stared at him. Sunset. It was barely noon. That meant hours of waiting. Hours of wondering, hours of looking at my siblings and wondering if one of us was living a lie. Left the office in tense silence. Outside, the winter air bit at my cheeks, but it wasn't the cold that made me shiver. It was the sudden realization that, for all my years of believing I knew who I was, that certainty might be gone before nightfall. By the time I reached my car, Daniel had already lit a cigarette, leaning against the hood of his truck. You. No, he said, exhaling a stream of smoke. If it's you, I won't be surprised. The words hit me like a slap. And why's that? He shrugged, but there was no humor in his expression. Because you were always different. Dad treated you not better, not worse. Just different. Like he was careful with you. I wanted to tell him he was imagining things. But deep down, I remembered moments too, moments that didn't fit neatly into the family story we'd been told. When I drove home, the road seemed longer than usual. My mind kept circling back to the box in the study, to what could possibly be inside that would change everything. Birth certificates? Letters. Photographs of a woman I'd never met. By the time the sun began its slow descent, my chest was tight with dread. I knew that whatever waited in that box could destroy whatever fragile bond my siblings and I still had. But I also knew I couldn't turn away from it, because part of me feared the truth. And part of me needed it. When I walked into my father's study just before sunset, both Daniel and Claire were already there. The box sat on the desk, small and unassuming. The key glinted in Claire's hand. She looked at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. Are you ready? I wasn't. But she was already sliding the key into the lock, and just as the lid creaked open, the front door slammed shut behind us. The slam of the door sent a jolt through me. Claire's hand froze on the lid of the box, her knuckles whitening. Around the key. Daniel spun toward the sound, his eyes narrowing. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow, deliberate, each one amplifying the tension in my chest. We weren't expecting anyone. Nobody else was supposed to be here. Then a man stepped into the study. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat dusted with snow. His hair was streaked with gray, his jaw unshaven. But it was his eyes that caught me, sharp, assessing, as if he knew us already. "Who are you?" Daniel demanded, stepping in front of the desk. The man didn't answer right away. He glanced at the box, then at each of us, like he was making a silent count. Finally, he said, "I'm here for what's in that box. Your father said I'd know when to come." Claire let out a disbelieving laugh. "Our father didn't mention you. And this box is for us." The man's expression didn't change. "No. That box is for the truth. And if you open it without me, you won't understand what you're looking at." I stepped closer, my pulse pounding. "And who exactly are you to my father?" He hesitated. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "I'm his oldest son." The words seemed to pull the air out of the room. Claire's mouth fell open. Daniel's face twisted in anger. I just stood there, my thoughts a tangle of disbelief and suspicion. "That's impossible," Daniel snapped. "Dad never." The man raised a hand. "It's not impossible. You just didn't know. He kept me a secret for a reason. And now he's gone, so it's my turn to tell the truth." I looked at him, trying to read his face, but his expression was steady, almost calm. Something about the way he stood, like he belonged here, made my stomach twist. Daniel moved toward him. "You can leave now." The man didn't flinch. "If you open that box without me, you'll regret it." I felt Claire's gaze on me. She was waiting for me to say something, to make a choice. But I couldn't. I didn't know whether to trust him or throw him out. All I knew was that the box felt suddenly more dangerous than I'd imagined. Finally, I said, "If you're telling the truth, then prove it. Show us something." His eyes softened, almost like he'd been expecting that. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. He placed it on the desk, right beside the box. It was a picture of my father, younger, smiling, with his arm around a woman I didn't recognize. And in front of them, a boy about 10 years old, with the same sharp eyes as the man standing in front of us now. "That's me," he said quietly. "And that woman is my mother." Silence pressed down on us. I stared at the photo, my heart thudding. There was no denying the resemblance. Still, a part of me wanted to reject it entirely. "Why now?" I asked. "Why not come forward before he died?" His jaw tightened. "Because he made me promise I wouldn't. Not until you were ready to hear the truth. And he told me the truth was in that box." Daniel shook his head. "This is insane." But the man stepped closer to the desk, placing his hand on the lid. "Open it. All of us. Together." Claire glanced at me again. This time, I nodded. Slowly, she turned the key. The lock clicked open, and the lid lifted just enough for me to see stacks of envelopes inside, each one with a name written on it in my father's handwriting. The first envelope was mine. And just as I reached for it, the man put his hand over mine, his voice low and urgent. "Before you read that," he said, "you need to know something about the night you were born." "Do you want me to keep going into chapter 4 so we can push the emotional intensity even higher?" The man's voice dropped low, almost like he was telling a story he had rehearsed 1,000 times but never dared to speak aloud. "Your father wasn't supposed to be there the night you were born. He had promised my mother he would spend that night with us. But he didn't." I felt the weight of his words press into me. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, because he said he was at the hospital with another woman. Your mother. Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. The man continued. I was 13. I remember waiting in the kitchen with my mother, staring at the clock, wondering why he wasn't home. She knew. She didn't say it out loud, but she knew. Later, I found out where he had gone. And who he had gone to see. That's when I understood, he had another family. You. His eyes locked on mine. I saw you that night. Just once. He brought me to the nursery window. I didn't know what I was looking at, just a tiny baby sleeping under a pink blanket. He didn't say you were my sister. He just said, that's the reason I have to make hard choices. The words settled in my chest like stones. I glanced at Daniel and Claire, but their faces were unreadable. I didn't know if they were angry at him, at me, or at our father. I reached for the envelope with my name on it. My hands shook as I slid a finger under the flap. But before I could open it, Daniel spoke. If what you're saying is true, then why didn't Dad leave something for you in the will? The man gave a humorless smile. Maybe he did. Maybe. It's in one of these envelopes. Claire leaned over the box and pulled out the rest, each one labeled with a name. Daniel. Claire. Mine. And one more, in handwriting that was shakier than the others. It simply said, for the one I couldn't claim. Daniel's gaze flicked between the man and the envelope. That's you. The man didn't deny it. I tore mine open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. My father's handwriting filled the page, but my eyes were drawn to the first line. You were the reason I had to lie. Breath caught. I read on. He wrote about the night I was born, about how he had been living two lives, how he had to make choices that broke people apart. But then came the line that made my stomach twist. The truth about your mother is not what you believe. I looked up sharply. What does that mean? I demanded. The man shook his head. It means there's more. And I know it. Daniel opened his envelope next, reading quickly before tossing it down. He left me nothing but an apology. Claire's hands trembled as she read hers. Tears welled in her eyes. He said I wasn't supposed to know about you. She looked at me, her expression shifting between pity and resentment. Finally, the man opened his envelope. His eyes scanned the page, and for the first time, his composure cracked. His jaw clenched, and he folded the paper back into the envelope without a word. What did it say? I pressed. He looked at me for a long moment. It said the truth. Isn't in these letters. It's somewhere else. And if I want to find it, I have to take you with me. I felt the air leave my lungs. Take me where? To the place your mother swore she'd never go back to, he said. The room was so silent I could hear the tick of the clock on the wall. My siblings stared at me, waiting for me to respond, to refuse, to fight. But the strange thing was, I wanted to know. Before I could answer, the sound of a car engine rumbled outside. Tires crunched on the driveway. The man's eyes went cold. They followed me here, he said. And if we don't leave now, you'll never learn the rest. We left through the back, cutting across the yard slick with half-melted snow. The man, my supposed oldest brother, kept his head down and his stride tight, like he'd counted these steps in his mind long before tonight. I heard a car door out front, voices carrying on the cold air. Daniel shouted something I couldn't make out. Claire called my name. But I followed the man to his truck because the word never had already begun to rot everything I thought I knew. Never tell. Never open. Never go back. And now we were doing all three. We drove without speaking, the heater sputtering as sleet sprayed the windshield. I watched the familiar landmarks thin into dark trees and flat water, the kind of winter evening where the world seems pared down to bone. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, as if truth were a raw thing that might bite. "Your mother swore she'd never go back," he said. "Not because of regret. Because of what she left there." The road curved, and the lake appeared, slate and endless. The cabin sat hunched close to the shore, its porch sagging, the same cabin Claire had inherited an hour earlier and refused to visit for years. He killed the lights, and we sat for a full minute listening to the engine tick as it cooled. "Whoever followed me won't come this far," he said. "They don't know about this place." My fingers didn't trust him, but my blood did. I climbed out, inside. The air smelled like damp wood and old coffee. The man went straight to the corner bookshelf, nudged it with his shoulder, and pulled until it groaned across the floor, revealing a narrow panel scarred with nails. He pried one edge up with a pocketknife and lifted the board free. Beneath, wrapped in oilcloth, was a metal biscuit tin stamped with a red barn and a car from another era. My heart stuttered. I knew that tin from a childhood memory that didn't feel like mine, me, 4 years old, reaching for it and being pulled back so sharply my wrist ached for days. "Don't touch that," my mother had said, the fear in her voice colder than the lake in January. The man set the tin on the table and looked at me like he was asking permission. I nodded. Inside were Polaroids bleached around the edges, a hospital bracelet so small it made my throat ache, a folded map, and a cassette tape labeled in my father's looping hand, "Keep only if she asks." The bracelet read a name I had never seen attached to me. First name mine. Last name his, I said, pointing. "Not our father's surname." The man shook his head. "Not a husband's either. A mother's." He lifted a Polaroid and laid it flat between us. My father, younger, hair dark, looking terrified and odd, stood on the porch of this very cabin. Beside him, a woman in a wool coat cradled a bundled infant. She faced away from the camera, as if even the lens were too much exposure. My stomach twisted. I knew that coat. I had seen it in a trunk at home, wrapped in tissue, touched only on the kind of days when my mother wore her sadness like jewelry, slid the cassette into a battered tape player, pressed play, and for a second the room filled with nothing but static thick as snowfall. Then my father's voice scratched through, intimate and exhausted. "If you're hearing this, I didn't find the courage to say it when I should have. It was winter and the roads were bad. She wouldn't go to the hospital. She said no doctors. No records. She was terrified he'd find her. So we came to the cabin. Your mother," he paused, and the word faltered, "your mother raised you as her own because she loved you more than she loved the story people would tell about her. But she didn't carry you. The woman in the coat did." The room tilted. I gripped the table edge to keep from sliding off the world. He kept talking, each sentence a match in a room soaked with kerosene. The woman was the man's mother. She had been in our father's life long before my parents married. She left once, came back, left again. When she returned the last time, she was pregnant and afraid. Of whom? My mouth formed the word, but my voice didn't leave my body, the tape answered. Of the man who thought he owned her. A man who thought blood was possession. He wasn't your father. He never would be. But if he found out about you, he would take you just to punish her. So we hid you in the open. We gave you a name that fit where you would live. We asked your mother to be brave, and she didn't realize I was crying until a tear hit the Polaroid and bloomed there, a bright bruise on the paper. The man watched me without flinching. He said he grew up learning to keep a secret human. To hold it like a bird and make sure it didn't suffocate or fly away too soon. He said the letters in the box were apologies, but the tin was the only truth that mattered. He said the men outside my father's house today weren't random, they were hired by the man my birth mother ran from, the one who liked to reopen old wounds because he didn't know how to live without them, the map unfolded to show the lake, the county roads, and a black X scored deep enough to tear the paper near the tree line behind the cabin. He tucked the tape back into the tin and grabbed a flashlight. We walked out into the night, our boots crunching through crusted snow, the beam punching a hole through the dark. The trees crowded closer, taller than I remembered. At the X, the ground was uneven, a patch of earth that thawed faster than the rest, as if even winter didn't want to keep this secret buried. He knelt and brushed away leaves. A second tin lay there, rusted at the seams. Inside, a notarized affidavit, a sealed envelope addressed to me in my birth mother's hand, and a folded document from the county clerk that made my lungs forget their work. Petition for adoption, it read, the names blacked out except for mine. And the date stamped 3 weeks after the night at the cabin. The signature at the bottom was my mother's, my mother who raised me, written in the determined hand of someone choosing love over shame, opened the envelope with shaking fingers. The letter was brief, almost stubbornly so. If you are reading this, it means I kept my promise and failed another. I left you where I knew you would be loved without question. I never came back because he was still watching me. I married, I left, I lived small, and I dreamed big for you. The photo tucked in the fold was of a woman turned toward the camera at last. Her eyes were mine. My mouth was hers. On the back she had written one sentence that pressed my heart flat. And then lifted it again, tell your mother thank you before you tell me anything at all. I stood there with the letter open to the stars and felt the shape of my life tilt into something messier and truer. The man was quiet a long time before he said her name aloud, the name I had never been given. He told me where she lived now, how long he had known, how many times he almost called. He asked if I wanted to meet her. He warned me that love doesn't make a map easier to read. It only makes you care more when you get lost. Walked back to the cabin with the tins under one arm in a silence that felt like reverence. At the porch, headlights swung between the trees and pinned us in white. 2 figures got out of a dark sedan, their coats too thin for this cold, their eyes hunting. The man beside me straightened. I could hear Daniel's truck on the road behind them, late but close, Claire's voice somewhere in the night saying my name like a prayer or a curse. I tucked my birth mother's letter inside my coat and stepped forward before anyone else could speak. If you came to split a family, I said, you're too late. It already split itself. If you came to know who I belong to, you're too late for that too. I belong to the people who chose me. One of the men smiled without warmth and lifted a folder. Its corner damp with snow. Inside it, he said, is a court order from a judge who likes old debts paid. He paused, enjoying the moment, then added, and a DNA test you didn't know was taken. The man at my side went still. He didn't look at me. He looked at them. And in the thin silence before he spoke again, I knew the night wasn't finished. Making strangers of us. Because when I asked, whose DNA, the one with the folder said a name I had never heard in my life, and it wasn't his, and it wasn't my father's.